Welcome back. A double bombshell in reporting from the New York Times this weekend about the president and his relationship with Russian President Putin. First, the Times reports that the U.S. is escalating online attacks on Russia's power grid in an effort, quote, partly as a warning and partly to be poised to conduct cyber strikes if a major conflict broke out between Washington and Moscow. But that's not all. The second bombshell in that report, that officials are worried about briefing the president. Quote, Pentagon and intelligence officials described broad hesitation to go into detail with Mr. Trump about operations against Russia for concern over his reaction and the possibility that he might countermand it or discuss it with foreign officials, as he did in 2017 when he mentioned a sensitive operation in Syria to the Russian foreign minister. Yikes. All right, let's bring in Michael McFaul. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. It's great to see you, Mr. Ambassador. Let's start there. How concerned should we be that our intelligence community doesn't trust the president with this kind of sensitive information?
It's incredible. If it's true, it's absolutely shocking. He is the commander-in-chief. He is the chair of our National Security Council when they meet, when they should, to discuss these kinds of issues. And when you have such a disconnect between the president and the rest of his national security team, as you do on Russia, that leads to these kind of bizarre cut-arounds and end-arounds where the government is not telling the president what he needs to know. And I think it's really irresponsible of the president, but also of his national security team. They have to play as one team in order to advance American national interests.
Well, I mean, what would you do behind the scenes if this was the conundrum you were facing, trying to make a decision about what to do in the best interest of the country, but being concerned that the president of the United States wasn't going to be on the same page?
I think this comes down to the National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolton. This is his job, National Security Advisor, right? That's the title. I worked in the White House for 3 years for the National Security Team. Your job, being on the NSC, is to brief the president and let the chips fall where they may in terms of decisions, but you can't deceive him. And by the way, it's not just on Russia. If you saw the interview that he did, the famous one now on ABC, where he talks about all kinds of things, with George Stephanopoulos. At one point, he asked him, do you think they're building nuclear weapons in North Korea? And he said, I don't know. Hold on a minute, Mr. President. You're supposed to know that. There's something called the CIA and the intelligence community that can brief you on that to get you up to speed on that. And same with Iran. If you listen to what the Secretary of State says, if you listen to what the National Security Advisor says, it sounds like we're almost going to war. And yet the president seems to be wanting to talk about engagement, which suggests, again, there is a disconnect between the president and his national security team. That's on John Bolton. He needs to do a better job.
The other piece of this is, of course, Republicans who have, frankly, publicly said that they don't really seem to have much of a problem with this in many cases. Here was Steve Scalise with Chuck on Meet the Press over the weekend.
Well, Chuck, the president and the White House have already pushed back against a number of elements of the story. But the bottom line is the president's taking aggressive action against Russia. I wish that would have happened in 2016 when they were trying to meddle with our elections. But I think the message is being sent right now. If the Russians try to take some action against our elections or any other country, we are already ready to go after them. And it should have happened in 2016. I'm glad that the president's being aggressive against any foreign country who's going to try to meddle with our elections.
Do you think that the president is actually being aggressive the way he says? I mean, he seems to take the question and completely turn it on its head.
Did you notice the passive tense in the verb there? The message is being communicated or something like that. He didn't say President Trump is stating emphatically, if you intervene in our elections, there will be consequences. And the reason no one can say that is because the president of the United States has never said that. And there can be all the messaging you want at a lower level, as I did as the U.S. ambassador to Russia. But if the president is not saying it himself, in this case with President Trump, Putin will read into that there is a division, and they will try to play that division. That's exactly what they have been doing for the last 2 years. And if you listen to President Putin, he talks about the state, the deep state, all these other people trying to get in the way of what the good President Trump wants to do in U.S.-Russian relations. That's bad messaging on the part of President Trump and his administration.
Let's talk about the substance of this report on the cyber tools that we've reportedly placed in Russia's power grid. You have, worked on this on your end as the ambassador. What behind this? I mean, are we behind the Russians in getting this into their grid? I mean, is this a capability they already have with us? And is this, in your view, directly related to this question of election interference?
Well, what I know, I used to know a lot about this when I was in the government, and it's all classified, so I'll be careful about that.
Sure.
And I don't know what's happened since. What I would say is I generally support the idea that we should have these capabilities available to us in times of crisis. I'm not so sure it's such a great idea to talk about it publicly. I think that's better left in non-public channels as a way to deter the Russians from doing things in the future. So I generally support the policy. I just don't know if I like the public relations component to it that we saw in the New York Times over the weekend.
I mean, is the public relations campaign basically part of the strategy, though? I mean, is this the IC trying to send a public message?
The IC doesn't need to send a public message. They have ways of communicating with the Kremlin and with their counterparts, the FSB in this case, inside Russia in a private way if they wanted to get that message across. Somebody obviously thought it was in our interest to do it publicly, and, maybe that's right. I'd have to think about what might be positive about that. But my reaction to that report is we don't want this in the public because it creates interest in other actors trying to thwart our capabilities. Why do that when you can keep it private?
Yeah. All right, Ambassador Mike McFaul, thank you very much, sir, for your time, as always,
Sure.
and your insights.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.